I'm so happy to be here. Learning Torah with you. It's a tough page. It's definitely not an easy daf. It's going to challenge us. But that's all we need to focus on for the next hour. All day long today, you all know that we're making a movie. We shot it in December. We've been in post-production. We've reached an important milestone in post-production where we're basically done picture editing. And now we're moving into visual effects and working with our post-production house where we're going to do the sound mixing and eventually conforming the camera footage, which is at a much higher resolution than what we work with here in the editing room, so that we don't overtax, our computer here. And we ran into, I'm obviously not going to get into the details, but we ran into a formatting glitch that we need to account for now. Now, you remember when we were in high school and we were taking math, and sometimes we were learning this very difficult math, and we were thinking, when am I ever going to have to deal with stuff like this in the real world? It's not going to happen. Why are they making us learn it now? And maybe one of our parents or our grandparents said, oh, it'll come up. And you're training your mind to have a supple mind so that you can figure out math problems when you have to. And it's good that you're learning this as a kid and developing a mathematical mind. And yes, so our grandparents were right. And it's, I'm not a tax accountant. I'm not a physicist. I don't normally have to do much high-level math. And the math that I had to figure out today, it's not calculus. It's not that complicated. But it involves ratios and conversions and keeping the process straight. And there's a lot of other people working on it. And, they will tell you a solution of how they want you to solve this problem that is sort of best for their department. But what's best for their department might create ungodly amounts of work for a different department or for me. I just want to get us back to where we thought we were. And, because I could follow the math, I could follow the trails. No, I know what you're telling me, but that's way too complicated. It's going to involve an extra week of work for a bunch of people. Whereas we can make a much simpler solution that's going to get us right back to where we thought we were. And everyone was like, yeah, we could do that. Yeah. No one cares as much as you do about your project, right? If you're doing construction and your contractor comes and tells you the various solutions that are on the table, he's going to tell you what's easiest for him. And if you can, keep an iron in the fire, keep your eyes on the prize, keep looking at what it is that everyone is trying to do, and say, well, I want to make sure that I understand it. And then you might find a simpler, better, more elegant solution than the other people who are only looking at it from the point of view of their department. Good lesson to learn today. Okay, but now let's just talk Torah. That's all we have to focus on. Thank God. Stephen in New Hampshire is in the house. John in Maine. Sharon in New Jersey. Paul in the Great Northwest. Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida. Bill in Missouri. Peggy in Colorado. Joseph in Massachusetts. Where it skipped on me. Joseph in Massachusetts. Melissa in Great Neck. Paula is watching. Bella's in Florida. Joseph, I think we are halfway through Daf Yomi. I was actually just thinking about this before. We're getting there. 2,711 pages. This is the episode numbers are always tied to the right day in the Daf Yomi schedule when we're on schedule, and we are right now. So we're at 12:58, and halfway through is going to be, let's do some quick math, 1,353, right, or 54, is half of 2,711, right, 1,353. and 55 or 6, right? So we're like less than 100 days away, about 3 months away, a little over 3 months away from the halfway point of our 7.5-year journey. Karen in Northern California, James in Indianapolis, Nancy, North Carolina, Peggy is happy that we are together. Paul is in the suburbs of Chicago. Exactly. People are talking about the math of how far along we are. Somebody, what is this? Leona says, I've never had to use trig or calculus. Thank God, right? Bill, I will say I almost never use algebra that I learned in high school as such, but I often do use formal logic, which uses many of the same techniques, just so. And I think when we train our minds as young people to use math and this idea of understand what the assumption is and what proposition is based on that assumption, and then that leads to the next assumption, right? And if you can follow the logic, then you can follow the sequence. And that's certainly what we're training our minds to do here in the Gemara. Ryan, hey, the other day I forgot what 7 times 7 was. Well, you're probably my age, right? By the way, my birthday's tomorrow. I'm going to turn 58 tomorrow. And, you turn 58, sometimes you walk into a room and you're like, why did I come in this room? Maybe you guys have had that experience. Bill, a good parallel lesson. We're all better off when everyone in the project feels that they have the same stake in the whole as they do in their department. Amen. Amen. That's a blessing when you can assemble a team like that. Yes, syllogism, says Joseph. Just so. And over there, Ella's in the house, Gwen in Michigan, Marjorie in Georgia, Debbie in New Jersey, Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. Our daf is Lamed, right? Page Lamed, daf Lamed, page 30, here in Tractate Gittin, the 19th volume of the Talmud. We're making our way through chapter 3, continuing our discussion today of Mishnah number 7, and we'll get to Mishnah number 8. As well. We picked this up near the top of page 30a. Mishnah number 7 that we're continuing our discussion of it is about one who brings a get from overseas, right? And he has to make that declaration. It was written in my presence. It was signed in my presence. And then what if he is not able? And what if the agent is unable to complete the task? Can he appoint a sub-agent? And then we have a kind of, can he appoint a sub-agent? That was our discussion here, Mishnah number 7. And then in Mishnah number 8, we're going to get back to that discussion brought up in Mishnah number 6 of can we assume that the husband is still alive when he sent the get? And who else, right? Other situations where we can make a presumption that a person is still alive, and what are the implications of that? We don't presume that someone has died unless we have a good reason to make that presumption, but that has legal ramifications in various areas of law, as we'll see. Okay, so near the top of 30a, and the Gemara relates another incident, right? Something that really happened, involving a certain man who said to the agents with whom he entrusted a get, a bill of divorce, if I do not arrive from now until 30 days have passed, let this be a get. Right? He's saying, okay, I'm going away for 30 days. I'm afraid that if I don't come back in 30 days, it's because maybe I died or something. But I want my wife to have a get rather than to be a widow. So if I don't, or for whatever his reason is, if I don't get back in 30 days, this is the get. Give it to her, right? She is then going to be divorced. I am appointing you my agent to give her this get, but the condition of the agency is don't give it to her for 30 days. Only give it to her if I don't return within 30 days, right? That's what he said. If I don't return within 30 days, give her the get. So he came at the end of the 30th day, right? So if he had come during the 30th day, he's fine. He said, if I come within 30 days. He came at the end of the 30th day, but He was prevented from crossing the river by the fact that the ferry was located on the other side of the river. So he did not cross the river within the designated time. He cut it too close. How many times have I said to my kids, get to the airport early, because even though you make that trip to the airport 100 times and it always takes 25 minutes to get to the airport, one day you could hit a traffic jam and it takes an hour. And if you didn't leave enough time, that's the day that you're going to miss the plane, right? Always. You never know what's going to happen. This guy says, give her the get if I don't come back in 30 days. When did he come back? Near the end of the 30th day. What happened? The ferry that he expected to find on the east side of the river was on the west side of the river. And by the time the ferry got to the east side of the river and then he came across, the day had ended. It was a new day, the 31st day. So he said, give her the get if I don't come back by the 30th day. He kind of made it. He tried hard to make it. He was on the other end of the other side of the river saying, I'm here, I'm here. But where he needed to be was on the correct side of the river, and he did not get there until the 31st day. Is it a get? Sounds like it is. He came at the end of the 30th day, but he was prevented from crossing the river by the fact that the ferry was located on the wrong side of the river, and he did not cross within the designated time. He said to the people across the river, see that I have arrived! See that I have arrived! Shmuel said, that is not considered to be an arrival. Even though it is clear that he intended to arrive, he didn't. So, the get is valid. They are divorced. And the Gemara relates there was another incident involving a certain man who said to agents with whom he had deposited a get, if I do not appease my wife within 30 days, let this be a bill of divorce. He went to appease her, but she was not appeased. Rav Yosef said, did he give her a large vessel full of dinars, gold coins, but she was not appeased? Although his inability to appease her was a result of his lack of financial means, since he did not properly fulfill his condition to appease her, the bill of divorce is valid. He said, if I appease her, then don't give her the get. If I can't appease her, then give her the get. He tried to appease her, and she was not appeased. So it sounds like just like the man who wanted to get back within 30 days and he didn't, the get is valid. They're divorced. There's those who say a different version of this incident. And that Rav Yosef said, did he need to give her a vessel full of dinars in order to appease her? This is a situation where he attempted to appease her, but she was not appeased. Therefore, he did fulfill the condition. In other words, what was his condition? He said, give her the get, right? Give her the get if I do not appease my wife within 30 days, right? Like, what does appease mean? A-P-P-E-A-S-E, appease. Sounds like people who are in a dispute, and if you appease them, and they are appeased, right, then you're not in a dispute anymore. You've made peace. That's what appease means, right? To make peace. So, what did he promise? What was the stipulation of giving her the get? Did he say, give her the get if I don't attempt to appease? If I don't do the action of appeasing myself, then give her the get. And he did that action. Or did he say, give her the get if I successfully appease her, right? I do the action and she is appeased by me. Which is it? It's a little bit unclear. And that's why we have two different interpretations of what happened. The Gemara explains the difference between the first and second versions of Rav Yosef's statement about that incident. This second version, in which the bill of divorce does not take effect, is according to the one who says circumstances beyond one's control have legal standing with regard to bills of divorce. Therefore, the bill of divorce is not valid, as the husband did all he could to appease her. This first version, in which the bill of divorce is valid, is according to the one who says circumstances beyond one's control have no legal standing with regard to bills of divorce. And that actually is the law. You don't get credit for trying. If you make a condition that says, I need to be back, if I'm not back here within 30 days, give her the get, and he's not back here until the 31st day, it doesn't matter how hard he tried, he wasn't back here on the 30th day, and therefore she gets the get, and they are divorced. Now, interesting note, that is the law. Circumstances beyond one's control do not change the outcome. Why? Because it was foreseeable that there would be some kind of circumstances beyond your control. If I tell my kids, get to the airport, leave a lot of time, because you might get stuck in traffic, or if I just say then make sure you get there in time, leave lots of extra time, it's foreseeable anytime you get in a car, especially in LA, that you might run into traffic. It is foreseeable. Don't say it was not foreseeable that I was going to get stuck in traffic. That's always foreseeable. You have to leave a lot of extra time. On the other hand, if the thing that happened is that he died, or a meteor struck the earth, okay, that's not foreseeable. And then maybe he did everything that he was supposed to do, and the circumstances beyond his control might actually have legal validity. But that is an additional note from the commentator, the Tur, in accordance with the statement of the Tosafos, that this only applies if the unavoidable circumstance was foreseeable. Then it has no significance. But if it was unforeseeable, it might not. Generally, though, most circumstances beyond your control actually are foreseeable, that something like that could happen. And so, if you've made a condition like that, if I'm not here in 30 days, give her the get, then, unless Martians landed, you're probably going to be divorced because you should have left more time. Because you said, if I'm not back in 30 days, give her the get. It's because you had a good idea in your head that 30 days was the right amount of time. You made the condition. No one put a gun to your head, so we're going to hold you to it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7. Here comes Mishnah number 8. This Mishnah continues the discussion of when we can presume that a person has remained alive and the legal significance of that. Now, this is a little complicated, so screw on your thinking cap. With regard to one who lends money to a priest or to a Levite or to a poor person, with the understanding that he will separate their portion of the teruma and tithes from his produce on the basis of that money. Okay, a farmer working in Israel when the Holy Temple was standing in Jerusalem, before he could eat any of his produce, right, or sell it for that matter, he had to separate the tithes. What were the tithes? The first 2% was teruma, that would get consecrated. It could only be given to a priest and eaten by a priest in his household. Then the tithe, miser. That is the 1/10 of what is left after the 2% is removed. Then the second tithe, which in some years is used to fund your expenses when you make the pilgrimage festival to Jerusalem for Passover, Shavuos, or Sukkot. And in other years is given to the poor man. Okay, a poor person receives the second tithe. So they could make an arrangement where instead of every time I harvest my field and I set aside my 2% teruma and then my 10% for the Levite and then another 10% of what's left for a poor person, and then I have to go find a Cohen and I have to find a Levite and I have to find a poor person to give it to. So instead of doing that, finding my Cohen, Levite, and poor person to give those tithes to, what I could do is, I have a particular priest that I like to work with. I have a Levite that I like to work with. I have a poor person that I like to work with. And what I could do is I could just give them money in advance. Okay, so for this Cohen, right? Let's say that usually the 2% of my crop that's going to come out, become teruma, it has a financial value of about, for round numbers, let's just say $100 a year, right? So what if but my priest doesn't live in the neighborhood. I like him. I like this priest. I like to work with him, but he lives far away. I only see him every few years. So I say to him, here's $500. I'm lending you this $500. Against what? Against your teruma. right? Now, when I harvest my crop for the next 5 years, which is going to produce 2% of my produce, which is going to be teruma, is going to be about $100 a year. So when that teruma comes into my hand, I'm going to use it to pay back this loan that I'm giving you. Now, the priest likes it because he's getting his value up front. Instead of receiving his teruma, about $100 worth of teruma once a year for 5 years, he's getting $500 right now. He's like, thank you very much. That's awesome. And then each year when I harvest the teruma, it's his, but I'm going to pay it back to myself, paying off this loan that I made him of giving him $500 in advance. Now, you might ask, what am I going to do with teruma? Only a priest can eat teruma. What am I going to do with it? Now, I can't eat teruma, but I could sell it to another priest. So I'm still going to have to find a priest to sell it to, but at least the priest that I'd rather give it to, I've given him his teruma, and now when I harvest teruma in those other years, I got to find some priest, because only priests can eat teruma. But I could sell it to some local priest, not give it to him. It's not his teruma. I'm selling it to him, and then I can keep the money. And then in terms of Levites, right, same idea. Let's say I produce $1,000 a year worth of first tithe that needs to go to the Levites, and I have a Levite that I like to work with who lives far away, so I give him $5,000. I'm lending you this $5,000 against the miser that I'm going to harvest $1,000 a year for the next 5 years. That's not consecrated food. It's just that you have to give a Levite that much. I give him the $5,000 now, and now for the next 5 years, when I harvest, each year I take that, about $1,000 worth, and I can keep it or sell it or do whatever I want with it because I'm just paying back this loan that I already lent to him. Right? It's because he has a sort of stream of income, which is going to be my miser for the next 5 years. I'm going to use that, to pay off the money that he owes me because I'm lending him those $5,000 now. Now, it's like a loan for sure, but it's not totally like a loan because it might be, for example, that I don't have a crop. There comes a year when I have no crop. Okay, so he's still going to keep the money. But I won't be able to pay myself anything off against that loan in that year when I have no crop. And that matters, as we'll see. So that's the basic arrangement. Why are we bringing this up now? It sounds like a complicated matter involving tithes and loans. Why are we talking about it here in Tractate Gittin? Because of that presumption of death. We started talking about it because if an agent has to deliver a get to a woman, it changes if the principal of that agent, meaning the husband who wrote the get, dies before the get is delivered, then we don't deliver the get because she became a widow. And how do we know if the agent is on the road that the husband is alive or dead? He doesn't know. So we can presume that the husband is still alive, and so he delivers the get. Here too, if you make such an arrangement like this, because that Cohen or that Levite lives far away, and now I'm going to keep his miser for myself to pay off that loan that I made for him. Well, what if he dies and I don't know about it, right? So I can't pay his miser if he's not alive, right? So keeping his miser to pay off his loan doesn't work if he has died. So that's why we're studying this now. All right, so now with that bit of background, hopefully this mission will make more sense. With regard to one who lends money to a priest, or to a Levite, or to a poor person, with the understanding that he will separate their portion of the teruma and tithes from his produce on the basis of that money, meaning he will subtract from the debt owed by the priest or Levite the value of the teruma and tithes separated from the produce. So now this person, the farmer, may separate the teruma and tithes from his produce on the basis of that money year to year, with the presumption that that priest or Levite or poor person is still alive. And the farmer need not be concerned that perhaps the priest or the Levite died in the interim, or that the poor person, it's not that the poor person died, but it's that the poor person became rich. If the poor person became rich, you can't give the poor man's tithe to him. But you can presume that the last you heard, he was poor, or that the priest or the Levite is still alive. You can keep working on that presumption until you have reason not to. The priest or Levite benefits from this arrangement. The priest or the Levite benefits from this arrangement as he receives his gifts up front in the form of a loan. And the farmer benefits in that he does not need to seek out a priest or a Levite each time he has produce from which he must separate teruma and tithes. Now, if in fact the priest or the Levite died, then the farmer must obtain permission from the priest's heirs or the Levite's heirs in order to continue the arrangement. However, if he lent money to the deceased and he stipulated in the presence of the court that the debt would be repaid in this manner, then he does not need to obtain permission from the heirs. That's Mishnah number 8. Here's the Gemara. The Mishnah assumes that the priest, the Levite, and the poor person acquire the teruma and tithes that the creditor separates from his produce, but they agree at the time of the loan that the tithes and teruma will then be acquired by the creditor as payment of their debt. And the Gemara asks, and can the priest, Levite, and poor person transfer possession of the teruma or tithes back to the creditor even though the produce did not come into their possession? Right now we're also looking at that law of acquisition that we've talked about. That when there's a purchase and sale or a gift is given, there has to be a formal act of acquisition for the transferee to be said to legally be in possession of what the guy is receiving. In this case, I lent money to let's say to a Levite. I lent money to a Levite, gave him $5,000 as a loan with the understanding that for the next 5 years, I would use the tithe, known as Meiser, the 10th of the crop that would normally go to a Levite to pay off this loan, right? But how can, right? So in other words, what I would normally be doing is I lend him $5,000 now, like legally, what are we doing? I lend him $5,000 now, and then in the fall, when I harvest my crop, I separate, the tithe, let's say it's $1,000 worth of wheat, and I would give it to the Levite because I have to give the tithe to the Levite. But because I lent him money, he would then give it back to me. Now, he can do that because he acquired it. I tithed my produce properly when I gave it to him. He acquired it, and then he gives it back to me to repay the loan. If I'm just keeping it rather than giving it to him and getting it back, which sounds like it should work, but now the Gemara is asking, but he never formally acquired that tithe, right? So if he never formally acquired it, how can he use it to pay off his loan that I made for him? And so the Gemara is suggesting perhaps we should bring in a third party who acts as the agent of the Levite to acquire it for him and then transfer it back to me. The whole point of doing this is because the Levite lives far away, so maybe he can use somebody who lives near me to be his agent to receive it and give it back. So the Gemara asks, and can the priest, Levite, and poor person transfer possession of the teruma or tithes back to the creditor even though the produce never came formally into their possession? So Rav says, this is stated with regard to associates of the priesthood and the Levites, i.e., people who have an arrangement with a specific priest or Levite to give him their teruma or tithes. The specific priest or Levite, therefore, has a presumptive status of ownership of the tithes or teruma based on this existing relationship and is considered to have acquired them even though he didn't, pull the items into his domain or take possession of a handkerchief as a formal act of acquisition. Because we have this standing arrangement, it's like he did acquire it from me and then I can take it back from him. And this has a presumptive status of ownership of the tithes or teruma and is considered to have acquired them. That's what Rav says. Shmuel says, this is stated with regard to one who has the priest or Levite acquire the gifts through the act of acquisition of others, that third party who lives locally, who acquire the teruma and tithes on their behalf. The lender is then able to reclaim the gift as payment of the loan. So Ula said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, who says in other contexts, the sages, by means of an ordinance, rendered one who does not acquire like one who acquires. Here too, the sages instituted an ordinance to enable this arrangement, right? For policy reasons, they made a decree that we can make an arrangement like this, and therefore, even though the Levite has not formally acquired his tithe until I actually give it to him, because we have this arrangement, and by rabbinic decree, they have acquired it, and they can, and so I can keep it to use to pay off the loan. Now, the Gemara explains why each of the aforementioned sages disagreed with the others. All the other sages, meaning Shmuel and Ula, do not state their opinions in accordance with the opinion of Rav. Why? Because the Mishnah does not teach explicitly that the law is stated with regard to associates of the priesthood and the Levites, right? The Mishnah never mentioned this third party who acquires the produce on behalf of the distant Levite. So why are you bringing that into it? Rav and Ula do not state their opinions in accordance with the opinion of Shmuel, because the Mishnah does not teach that the law is stated with regard to one who has the priest or Levite acquire the gifts through an active acquisition of others. Rav and Shmuel also do not state their opinions in accordance with the opinion of Ula, because we do not establish the Mishnah to be stated in accordance with an individual opinion. In this case, Rabbi Yosef. Rather, the assumption is that the ruling of the Mishnah is written in accordance with the majority opinion. Now, the sages taught in a baraisa with regard to one who lends money to a priest or to a Levite or to a poor person with the understanding that he will separate their portion of the teruma and tithes from the produce. On the basis of that money, he may separate the teruma and tithes from his produce on the basis of that money with the presumption that they are still alive. Right? The arrangement works. We've explained the arrangement. It is a legal and valid arrangement. And he can continue the arrangement. He gave him the $5,000 in year one, and for 5 years, he can keep the tithe each year rather than have to go deliver it to a Levite, because he already paid the Levite in advance, 5 years worth. And he doesn't have to go and investigate each year. Is that Levite still alive? Because if he's not alive, you can't, if he's dead, you can't tithe with him, right? Now you could say, but his heirs would inherit the same tithe. Now, you don't have this arrangement with the heirs, so it's not clear that this would work if the guy died. But because the arrangement is work and the sages decreed this way, you can keep it going with the presumption that that Levite is still alive until you hear different. Now, the Baraisa continues, and the farmer may contract with them according to the low market rate. Now that we're talking about, I'm giving you $5,000, as a loan against the $5,000, the $1,000 worth of tithe that I'm going to separate from my crop each year for the next 5 years. Well, that's based on the price of wheat today. But as we all know, in the world, the price of wheat goes up and down. So if the price of wheat goes up, then this $5,000 that I gave him now, right, the Levite is not actually better off, because next year maybe the tithe of my same crop, if the price of wheat went up, would be worth $6,000. But he took $5,000 now, as against 5 years, right? So, and he may contract with them according to the low market rate, i.e., the farmer may set a price for the gifts that he will separate in the future based on either their value at the time of the loan or their value when they will be separated, whichever is lower. And this is not subject to the prohibition of ribis, interest, meaning that if the market rate falls, it will not be considered as though they are repaying in excess of the amount of the loan. And the sabbatical year does not cancel this loan. Even after the sabbatical year, the lender may continue to collect his debt in this manner. But now, usury is the word that's normally used in this context. The Torah prohibits a Jew from lending money to another Jew at interest, right? If I lend you $1,000, okay, I can do that. And you can borrow the $1,000. And then when you're ready to repay me, you give me $1,000 back. I'm going to not have the use of that $1,000 for as long as you borrowed it and haven't paid it back. That's why banks, when they lend money, charge interest, because they've lost the use of the money while the loan is outstanding. But the Torah says we cannot lend to each other at interest. Now that's a very straightforward law. Okay, I lend you money, you pay back to me, I can't charge you interest. Where it gets interesting is if I lend you money and you're going to pay me back in wheat, how much wheat, right? If the price changes, you might end up paying me back more than what I lent you. And then it is interest, right? That's what ribis is. It's kind of interest that happens even though you didn't charge formal interest. In this case, we're not going to worry about that because there was no guarantee that that loan was ever going to be paid back anyway, right? If I give him that $5,000, let's say for the next 5 years, my farm fails and I don't produce any crop. I don't ask for that $5,000 back. This arrangement is a convenience for the benefit of the Levite. And for me, in the sense that I don't have to go, travel to find him. But if my farm fails, I can't ask for that money back. And that's why we're not going to worry about if the price of wheat fluctuates, that I might end up doing a little bit better and he might end up doing a little worse because he had a chance that he was just going to get the $5,000 for free. He just got it now. He never has to worry anymore. He's received Meiser from me for 5 years. And then if the fact is that my farm doesn't produce that Meiser for the next 5 years, that's not his problem. And that's why the interest is not a problem either. Now the Baraisa continues, and if the lender seeks to renege on this arrangement, the lender, who's the lender? I'm the farmer. I'm lending to the Levite. And if the lender seeks to renege on this agreement, he may not renege. Once I've given him the $5,000, I can't get it back. If the owner despaired of retrieving the loan, as he thought that he would not need to separate any teruma or tithes, and therefore thought that he would not collect payment for the loan, like my farm fails, right? The crops just don't come in for the next 5 years, so I despair of ever getting it back. Although it later became clear that he was mistaken, he may not separate the teruma and tithes from his produce on the basis of that money, because one may not separate teruma and tithes on the basis of one's loan that he had thought was lost. Once he despaired of retrieving the loan, the sum of the loan is permanently acquired by the borrowers, and the lender may not use the tithes and teruma to serve as repayment. Now the Gemara clarifies the rulings of the Baraisa. The master said he may contract with them according to the low market rate. The Gemara asks, isn't that obvious? And the Gemara answers, this teaches us that even though he did not contract explicitly that he would use the lower market price, he is considered like one who did so, who did contract in that manner, and he may do so anyway. Because this is so much, this arrangement, it works so much to the advantage of the Levite or the priest or the poor person, this assumption that it'll be paid back at the lower market rate is always a valid assumption. Now the Baraisa also teaches, and this is not subject to the prohibition of ribis, interest. And the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? And the Gemara answers, since when the priest or Levite has no teruma or tithes that he received from the creditor, meaning when the grain in the field did not sprout due to a drought, he does not give anything to the creditor in repayment of the loan. Right? I gave him the $5,000. None of that money is ever going to come back to me. I can only get it paid back by the tithe that I harvest each year from my crop. And if I have no crop each year, okay, then I don't get repaid. And because it's that case, because that is the case, therefore when the priest or Levite has teruma and tithes, this is also not subject to the prohibition of interest. The Baraisa also teaches, and the sabbatical year does not cancel this loan. The Gemara explains, the reason is that concerning this loan, one cannot read the verse stated with regard to the cancellation of debts by the occurrence of the sabbatical year from Deuteronomy 15:2. He shall not exact it of his neighbor and his brother because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. Since in any event one cannot claim repayment of this type of loan, it is not addressed by that verse. It's a loan, yes, but it's such a, the loan is, there's no guarantee that I'll ever get it paid back, and I understand that. So because there's no guarantee that I'll ever be paid back, it is also not canceled by the arrival of the sabbatical year. The Baraisa also teaches, and if the lender seeks to renege on this agreement, he cannot renege. And Rav Papa said they taught this only with regard to a homeowner, i.e. an owner of produce who wishes to renege on his agreement with a priest. In that situation, the homeowner cannot demand repayment of the loan with money. However, with regard to a priest who wishes to renege on his agreement with the farmer, if he seeks to renege, he may renege. The priest can end this arrangement. How would he end it? I guess he would pay back the money. He has that option. He doesn't have to do it, but he could. What is the reason for this? As we learned in a Mishnah at Bava Metzia 44a, in any transaction, if the purchaser gave the seller money but did not yet pull the produce, no active acquisition, then the seller can renege on the sale, right? Because the purchaser never took possession of the thing that he's buying, even though he gave money for it, the seller can cancel the transaction. He doesn't have to give the money back, but he doesn't have to go through with the transaction. And likewise, the priest doesn't have to go through with this. And the Baraisa also teaches if the owner despaired of retrieving the loan, he may not separate the Teruma and tithes from his produce on the basis of that money, because one may not separate Teruma and tithes on the basis of a loan that he had thought was lost. And the Gemara asks, well, isn't this obvious, as he is no longer owed the money? And the Gemara answers, no, it is necessary to teach this law in a case where the seeds produced stalks and became dried out, lest you say that the growth of stalks is a significant matter, as there is a chance that the produce will grow, and so he does not fully despair. The Baraisa teaches us that even in such a situation, since the produce is very unlikely to recover, he does despair of retrieving the loan, and the arrangement is canceled. It is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, with regard to one who lends money to a priest or to a Levite in court, and they died before repaying the loan. So he separates teruma and tithes. Where am I? He separates teruma and tithes on the basis of that money with the presumption that there is one from the tribe who inherited from them, and he did not confirm that the deceased priest or Levite has immediate heirs because the arrangement was made in court. He then continues the arrangement based on the transfer of the debt to the heirs. Now, think about it. I gave $5,000 to this guy. If he did die, where did that $5,000 go? To his son, right? Now so the son kind of owes me that money. He doesn't have to pay me, but I can keep the Meiser each year, the tithe, rather than find some other Levite to give it to until that loan is paid back. And if he left money to a poor person, if he lent money to a poor person in court, the poor person died before repaying the loan, the creditor separates tithes on the basis of that money with the presumption that the poor of the Jewish people would agree to continue the arrangement. And Rabbi Achai says it is with the presumption that the poor of the world would agree to continue the arrangement. And the Gemara asks, what is the difference between the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov and the opinion of Rabbi Achai? And Rabbi Achai, too, must have meant only poor Jews and not poor Gentiles, because we don't give a tithe. The poor man's tithe is not given to members of other nations, right? The poor man's tithe is given to other Jews. That's what the Torah commands. Now, the Gemara answers, there is a difference between them where the only poor people to be found are poor Samaritans. According to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, they are not considered to be converts, see Kedushin 75b, and one may not continue the arrangement with them serving as the poor people. According to Rabbi Achai, they are considered converts, and one may continue the arrangement with them serving as the poor people. We're on 30b. It was taught in a Baraisa that if the poor person became wealthy, then the homeowner may no longer separate tithes based on his outstanding loan, and the borrower who's now wealthy acquires the money remaining in his possession. And this is because from the outset the understanding was that the loan would be repaid only by separating the poor man's tithe, not that the poor man would ever have to give cash back if he became wealthy. The Gemara asks, and according to the sages, what is different about death when the poor man dies that they instituted an ordinance to enable the homeowner to continue to separate tithes based on other poor people? And what is different about wealth when the poor man becomes wealthy that they did not institute an ordinance? And the Gemara answers, death is common, whereas wealth is not common. And the sages did not enact an ordinance for an uncommon circumstance. And Rav Papa says this explains the folk saying that people say, if one says to you that your friend died, believe it. But if one says to you that your friend became wealthy, do not believe it until it has been proven. People die all the time. People get rich. It doesn't happen so often. The Mishnah teaches that if the priest or Levite died, the lender needs to obtain permission from the heirs to continue the arrangement. It is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says that this is referring to heirs who inherited. And the Gemara asks, and are there heirs who do not inherit? What is meant by the expression heirs who inherit? Rather, Rabbi Yochanan said this means heirs who inherited land, as one can collect debts from land bequeathed by a borrower, and not heirs who inherited money, as lenders cannot collect debts from money bequeathed by a borrower. Right? You can collect debts from land that was inherited, but you cannot collect debts from money that was inherited. That's the difference between real property and movable property. With regard to this matter, Rabbi Yonasan says if the priest left his heirs enough land to fill a needle, meaning a minimal amount, then the homeowner collects, i.e. separates teruma in the amount of produce that has value of a full needle of land. If he left enough land to fill an axe, which is a larger amount, then the homeowner collects the value of a full axe of land. And Rabbi Yochanan says even if he left his heirs enough land to fill a needle, the homeowner collects the value of a full axe of land. And this is like the incident involving the small portion of land in the court of Abaye. The children of a deceased man had inherited a small field that was worth only a fraction of the debt that their father had owed. The creditor seized the land in payment of the debt. And Abaye ruled that even after the orphans pay the creditor the value of the land to repurchase it, the creditor can seize the land again, and the orphans will have to pay for it again to have it returned until the entire debt has been repaid. Right? Because the father, who owed a lot of money, had real property, land. And even though it was a very small piece of land that was not enough to satisfy the whole debt, the creditor could keep seizing that piece of land, make the heirs purchase it if they want to get it back, and then seize it again and have them keep repurchasing it because you can seize land, but you can't seize money that was inherited. Now, the sages taught in a Baraisa with regard to an Israelite who said to a Levite, there is tithe of yours in my possession that I separated from my produce on your behalf. One is not concerned about the teruma of the tithe that is in it, i.e. the 1/10 of the tithe that is given to the priest and forbidden to both the Levite and the Israelite. Meaning, a Levite, right, a farmer harvests his crop. 2% goes to the Cohen, to the priest. 10% goes to the Levite. So the Levite receives that quantity of produce, the meiser, the tithe, the 10th of the farm produce that goes to the Levite. Now, from the Levite's point of view, he receives this produce as a tithe that was given to him. That's his income. Why? Because Levites didn't get a portion of land in the Holy Land. They got to serve God and serve in the Holy Temple, and that's why they received tithes from all the tribes that did receive land. But the Levite, when he receives that tithe, just like anybody who receives charity, he has to set aside a tithe of his income, right? So 1/10 of the 10th that he received, he now has to turn around and give to the priests. That's called the teruma of the tithe, right? So with regard to an Israelite who said to a Levite, there is tithe of yours in my possession that I separated from my produce on your behalf. Now, one is not concerned about the teruma of the tithe that is in it, i.e. the 1/10 of the tithe that is given to the priest and forbidden to both the Levite and the Israelite. Rather, it is assumed to be only first tithe. However, if he said to him, there is a core of tithe of yours, a core is a volume, big volume, there's a core of tithe of yours in my possession, then one is concerned about the teruma of the tithe that is in it. And the Gemara asks, what is the Baraisa saying? And Abaye said, this is what it is saying. In the case of an Israelite who said to a Levite, there is tithe of yours in my possession, right? I've set aside a tithe for you and I haven't given it to you yet. And here is money in exchange for it. Then one is not concerned that perhaps the Levite converted the tithe that is now in the possession of the Israelite into teruma of the tithe. And the problem with teruma of the tithe, right? The 10th of the 10th, the Levite receives a 10th, then he has to set aside a 10th of that to give to a priest. That's teruma. Only a priest can eat it. So if we've now got this arrangement where the Israelite is keeping the tithe because he already previously lent money to the Levite, but the Levite is going to have to convert some of that into teruma of the tithe, which the Israelite who's keeping it can't eat because it's teruma. That's the issue. Since the Israelite did not specify how much tithe of the Levites he had, the Levite would not know how much of this other tithe could be exempted from the teruma of the tithe by converting this tithe into teruma of the tithe. But if an Israelite said to a Levite, there is a core, right? If he specifies how much of your tithe I have, and here is money in exchange for it, then one is concerned that since the Levite knows the amount of the tithe, perhaps he converted it into the teruma of the tithe for tithes that he has elsewhere. And the Gemara questions Abai's explanation. Is that to say that we are dealing with wicked people who take money in exchange for the tithe and afterward convert it into teruma of the tithe? Why would a Levite do that? That's prohibited. Once the Levite takes money in exchange for the tithe, it is no longer his to convert into teruma of the tithe. Why would the Baraisa address the case of a Levite who acts in this fashion? Rather, Rav Misharshia, the son of Rav Edi, said that this is what the Baraisa is saying in the case of an Israelite who said to the son of a Levite, this is tithe of your fathers in my possession, about which I had informed him while he was alive. Here is money in exchange for it. So one is not concerned that perhaps before his death, his father converted it into teruma of the tithe for tithes that he had elsewhere, and the son may accept the money. But if an Israelite said to the son of a Levite, there is a core of tithe of your fathers in my possession, and here is money in exchange for it, then one is concerned that perhaps his father had already converted it into teruma of the tithe for tithes that he has elsewhere, and the son may not accept this money. And the Gemara questions Rav Misharshia's explanation. Why is there a concern that the father may have converted it into teruma of the tithe for tithes that he had elsewhere? If one has produce that needs to have teruma or teruma of the tithe separated from it, and he wants to perform the separation from other produce to exempt all the produce, the sages established that the other people must be situated nearby. And our chaverim, who are meticulous in their observance of mitzvahs, especially the laws of teruma and tithes, suspected of separating teruma from produce that is not situated near the produce they seek to exempt? Rather, Rav Ashi said, this is what the Baraisa is saying. With regard to the son of an Israelite who said to a Levite, this is what my father told me, that there is tithe of yours in my possession, or that there is tithe of your fathers in my possession, then one is concerned about the teruma of the tithe that is in that that presumably was never separated. And since it is not a set amount, the homeowner would not have rendered the tithe fit for him by separating the teruma of the tithe. But if the son of an Israelite said to a Levite, my father told me that there is a core of tithe of yours in my possession, or that there is a core of tithe of your fathers in my possession, then one is not concerned about the teruma of the tithe that is in it. Since it is a set amount, the homeowner is assumed to have rendered the tithe fit by separating the teruma of the tithe. The Gemara questions Rav Ashi's explanation. And does the homeowner have permission to separate the teruma of the tithe from the tithe of the Levite? The Levite is the one who is required to separate the teruma of the tithe and to give it to a priest. And the Gemara answers, yes, the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Abba Elazar ben Gamla. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Abba Elazar ben Gamla says, the verse states, concerning teruma of the tithe, and the gift that you set apart shall be reckoned to you as though it were grain of the threshing floor. I'm almost done, very close to done. Questions or comments, get them in. And the verse speaks of two terumas. One is standard teruma, and one is teruma of the tithe. Since they are mentioned together, they can be compared. Just as standard teruma is taken by estimate, as there is no requirement for the amount separated to be measured precisely, and it can be taken by thought, as one is not required to physically separate it before consuming the remaining produce, so too, teruma of the tithe may be taken by estimate and by thought, and this comparison also teaches that just as the homeowner has permission, i.e. the right, to separate standard teruma, so too the homeowner has permission to separate teruma of the tithe, which would be necessary when we make such an arrangement, like I'm paying you your tithes in advance for a few years, and then I'll just keep, your tithe of produce as it comes in from year to year to pay off the money that I loaned to you at the outset of that arrangement. Not easy stuff. If it got a little confusing along the way, don't worry about it. Okay, Nina has her book club tonight, so she's not able to, pull the comments and give them to me. So I am scanning the comments, and that will take a little bit of time, and I might miss one, and I apologize for that in advance. Now, Bill, in the case of the incident of the man who arrived on the 31st day due to traffic on the I-5, as it were, could he and his wife not remarry? Sure they could, but they would be divorced and need to remarry before they could be permitted to each other again. As you say, Bill, with him no doubt sleeping on the sofa for a great many nights. Just so. And Joseph says, as I am literally eating peas. LOL, I am appeased. Funny. Joe Branson says, do or not do, there is no try. Attributed to Yoda. Very good. Jonathan, seems like these are all connected to the concept of what happens when the thing out of our control happens. Kevin asks, what if an agent gets killed? Right, so if an agent gets killed, that's the same as if he drops dead, right? So he's not able to complete his agency. Now, the principal who appointed him, is it foreseeable to him that his agent might not be able to complete his agency because something happens to him? He gets arrested. He gets killed. He's in an act of God. He is in an earthquake. Something happens. Or he turns out to be dishonest. Any of these things could happen. In which case he doesn't complete his agency. I think what you might be asking, though, is the agent intended to complete his agency, but he died. And so we find, let's say, the get on his person, and he's dead in the street. And so somebody takes this get to the court. What does the court do? Well, the court cannot assume that this is a get that needs to be delivered to the wife, right? So they're either going to tear it up or they're going to have it sent back to the husband and ask, did you intend to send this get? Was it delivered? We found it on this person. Was he your agent? Did he die? Do you want to still complete it? Etc. Jonathan, my wife and I often discuss this. What can possibly go wrong is what she is expert at pointing at. While I say, what can possibly go wrong? While I say, what can possibly go wrong rhetorically as an act of denial that anything will. Each comes with their own skills. Oh, very good. You're saying the same words and you mean something totally different by them. Your wife is saying, well, what can go wrong? Let's figure it out. And you're saying, what could go wrong? Very good. Totally different. Elvis, question. Is the prohibition on lending money at interest to a fellow Jew because we are a family, and just as you shouldn't charge interest to your own bloodkin, you should likewise refrain from your larger family? I think that's a really interesting analysis, and you might be right. It's certainly beyond the scope of our discussion today. I don't know, if the sages looked into the Torah and can say that that's the reason. I suspect that you shall not lend, at interest to your fellow Jew just because it's written in the Torah. Why did God put it in the Torah? I think it's probably a hook, meaning it's one of those laws that we don't know what the reason is, right? Same as why don't we eat pork? Why don't we eat shellfish? You've heard me say this before, and if you're new here with us and you haven't heard me say this before, this is very important. Very often you'll hear out there in the culture that the reason Jews don't eat pork is because at the time the Torah was given, pork was less healthy than it is now. Pigs had diseases that they don't have now. They were able to be checked for diseases now that they weren't able to check for then. They don't eat lobster because lobster is less healthy. No. The reason that the Torah says you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk, you shall not eat, food that comes from this list of animals, or you shall only eat the animals that are on this list, etc. The reason for that is because God said so. And the Talmud says elsewhere, we shouldn't say that there's a rational reason why I can't eat those things. Rather, you should say, those things look really tasty to me. I wish I could eat them. But what could I do? My Father in heaven said don't eat them, so I don't eat them. That's it. Now, the effect of having different dietary laws for our people than, the rest of the humans on earth have is that we have to build, societal infrastructure so that we can eat. In other words, Jews tend to associate together and build communities that have a kosher butcher, that have a mikveh, so that the wives can go once a month. The effect of having these laws that are different for us than for other people is that it kind of ties us closer to each other and actually keeps us more of a strong family. And you might say that that's the reason that God put in those laws, but it's quite indirect. And we can't be sure that that's why God did it. That is an effect, but that might not be the actual reason why God put it there. We don't know why God put it there. We just do it because God said so. Lucy, what if the lender makes a 5-year loan teruma arrangement with a priest, giving the money up front, then the lender dies after 1 year, meaning the priest? Does the heir have to follow the arrangement, or can he get the loan back? You're saying, right? If who dies, then the lender dies, right? Okay. So I gave $5,000 to the priest, expecting to pay off that loan by keeping his teruma year after year. Now I die, right? So the question is, does my son, who now comes in my place, can he keep the teruma from the field because I lent $5,000 to the priest? That question we haven't covered yet. Great question. I think it's coming up in our discussion. Sal, you forgot to light the candle. Well, it's the very end of the class, but let's do it anyway. Let's light the wisdom candle. Thank you, Peggy. What can I do without Nina? I'm lost without her in so many, many ways. And I'll check the comments over there. Okay, another questions. And Gwen says, happy birthday to you. Yes, it's my birthday tomorrow. Thank you, Gwen. Okay, tomorrow's Friday, so we'll have our class at the regular time, Friday at noon Pacific. We'll also have our class Saturday night after Shabbos is over, quite late on Saturday night at this time of year. And then Nina and I are going away for a few days. Our nest is empty. The kids have gone. They've flown the coop. Our son is at camp. And our daughter's in Israel. And we're going to take just a few mom and dad days to ourselves. So there won't be class, just telling you now, on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And we'll get back together probably on that Thursday. We're going to then be several pages behind. And either we'll do a bunch of double pages or I'll do a highlight show and get us back on schedule. But at any rate, tomorrow at noon Pacific and Saturday night at the regular time when Shabbos ends in LA. Have a great night.